Move on to Brazil now. We're very lucky because we have Marcelo Ramos from Brazil, who's a comrade from the current, which works inside the PSOL. He'll explain how they did the last elections as well. And he's going to speak about that. Particularly important since Bolsonaro just got elected.
First, thank you so much to everyone, to comrades of Socialist Resistance. And secondly, I'm sorry, but my English is not fluent, and I think it's better I read a letter that I write in this afternoon, and that will help me in review. And thank you to put me in this place to we talk about Brazil is too necessary in this moment. Today Brazil is living through one of the saddest moments of its history. The history of the Brazilian people is essentially a history of resistance. Since the European colonial invasion, it has been very difficult to survive in our land, but we fight and resist. As you may know, the capitalist development in my country is permeated with blood and throughout its history. This includes the fact that there was a military dictatorship in Brazil between 1964 and 1985, include murdered 4,500 people, 500 in calculating official statistics, and 500 indigenous is not there as in statistics. But democratic struggles of the working class in 1980s succeeded in securing important social achievements that were brought together for the Federal Constitution of Brazil, approved in 1988. We succeeded in approving the need for a social function of private property, education and free public health for all, democratic freedoms, labor rights, and great popular participation in decisions. Although the current constitution is applied selectively, it still protects most of the rights historically conquered by the subaltern peoples in Brazil. What is at stake today if the Bolsonaro election is exactly the end of the Republican cycle that began with 1988 Constitution. 30 years later, capitalism plunges Brazil again into a cycle of high repression. Even if all their problems and contradictions, we recognize that Lula and Workers' Party class conciliation governments introduced some poverty reductions measures and invested more in social rights than all previous governments. So, how was it possible for Brazil to elect a fascist president who defends the military dictatorship and the persecution to the left even after 30 years of the government of a party that was born of the unions and landless movement? Bolsonaro did not come out of nowhere. We must remember two fundamental problems: the post-dictatorship democratic transition and the waning of the Workers' Party popularity from 2013 onwards. First, Brazil, unlike Argentina, we had a transition to democracy conducted by the military itself. They gave themselves an amnesty for their crimes against humanity. They ensured that the first presidents continued their policy, and the majority of the population had a positive memory. A part of population had a positive memory of the military dictatorship. They promoted a conservative common sense which praised that dictatorship as a time of economic progress and social order, devaluing the persecution and violations of rights that occurred. Officials like Bolsonaro kept defending the policy of dictatorship without suffering any retaliation. Secondly, from 2014, when this international economic crisis had serious effect on Brazil, the Workers' Party governments were ideally challenged by popular mobilizations that drove millions of people to the streets. Intellectuals close to the Workers' Party claim that these protests were conservative and started the new fascist wave in Brazil. In my opinion, this analysis is incorrect and dishonest. The so-called days of June of 2013 were popular demonstrations, popular protests unleashed in the context of the preparation for the World Cup, and began with protests against the increase of the price of public transport, and criticism were extended to the withdrawal of investment in health and education for the World Cup of 2014. The problem here is that if on the one hand there was a new generation of young social activists who formed in the leadership of choose protests, and I am an example of this. A young university student from the periphery of one of the great cities of Brazil. On the other hand, the extreme right, the far right, went to streets and participated in choose protests, agreeing that the fight against corruption is as the main demand. The general response of the Workers' Party government was the widespread repression of this protest, the use of new coercive legislation, and the new national force, a military force created by Lula for use in military occupation of favelas, poor neighborhoods, and large protests. Initially, the direction of these manifestations, protests that questioned the government and the project of the Workers' Party to govern, was from a left perspective. Even though there was great questioning of the traditional organizations of the left, the general tune was defense of improvement of the life of poorest ones, more investment in health, education, and leisure. However, if the cooling of the leisure protests, there was a little organization balance left. Even if some growth of the PSOL, Socialist and Freedom Party, and the homeless worker movement, the following years were about growth and organization of the far right. While the idea of getting rid of the Workers' Party was growing, What was done through the impeachment process of Dilma Rousseff, leading in Congress by a deputy, a parliament, who today is imprisoned for corruption, and through the imprisonment of Lula, orchestrated by a judge, Sérgio Moro, who made this a political trial and fulfilled so well his mission that he prevented the election of Lula as president, that last week he became the new Minister of Justice of Bolsonaro. What's happening today in Brazil is the conclusion of a process of capital recovering from its crisis in an extremely violent way. Today, Brazil faces its biggest financial crisis in history. Starting in 2013, a dispute about the cases and solutions of the crisis began. The fragile base of the recent democracy in Brazil, the inability of the radical left to create an alternative political workers' party project, and the great capacity that the far right has had to organize in Brazil and in the world provide the basis for understanding why Bolsonaro was elected in Brazil. My family is an example of poor workers who gave Bolsonaro his victory. For them, Bolsonaro represents change. It's crazy. In a country where rates of violence have surpassed tools of wars such as tools in Iraq and Afghanistan, Bolsonaro, if he speaks good bandit is dead bandit, represents security. For my relatives, Bolsonaro represents the fight against corruption. In a country where all traditional parties are plugged in corruption, where even the Workers' Party has gained parliamentary support for its government through corruption relations with traditional parties and has been placed by the media as the great example of corrupt party, it matters like little whether there is evidence that Bolsonaro and his party are so corrupt. What matters is to take the Workers' Party out of government. Bolsonaro's surprising election is explained by the anti-Petism, anti-Workers' Party, fomented by the large media, but also by the leap of organization that the far right has been giving worldwide. The widespread use of fake news in social networks, often financed by entrepreneurs outside of a regular company fund, a crime in Brazil, was Bolsonaro's main way of organizing a passionate army of militants who are today the basis of Brazilian fascism. There are many similarities to Trump in the way he used hate speech against LGBT groups, quilombolas, indigenous, and landless and homeless, promoting security and prosperity for conservative Christian families. But there are also big differences with Trump, both in the neoliberal agenda that Bolsonaro and his new economy minister want to affect, in the social security and the state-owned enterprise, but also in the greater aggressiveness of hatred toward the left. Bolsonaro, in addition to end the public universities and labor rights, also announced during the campaign and reaffirmed after the election that his government will pursue to arrest and expulsion of all Reds from the country, pointing mainly to the Workers' Party and PSOL. He intends to resume the persecutions of the military dictatorship. He has already stated that he intends to kill 30,000 people, and it is okay to die innocent. Everything to free Brazil from communism and the left. He also pledged to attack all popular governments in Latin America, such as Venezuela, Ecuador, and Bolivia. For this he will have a wide support network. Most of the bourgeoisie is with him. Most conservative evangelical leaders are with him, like Bishop Edir Macedo, owner of Universal Church of Kingdom of God, who has 30 churches in United Kingdom and owns the second largest communication network in Brazil. The military leadership is with him. The judiciary summits have already shown that they will not face it. But do not doubt, we will resist. Today in PSOL, we have no doubt that the alternative is popular mobilization and on the streets. We will not succumb to fear of what is to come. We are counting on the formation of a broad democratic and anti-fascist front that oppose Parliament and the streets against Bolsonaro's government measures, including countering on parties and sectors traditionally linked to bourgeoisie, but that do not support the Bolsonaro's project. We want our Democrats against Bolsonaro and Brazilian fascism. We understand that only a broad front in defense of democracy can oppose the force that fascism has won in Brazil. PSOL, our party, has grown and demonstrated strength as a pool of organization of the popular movements that will resist in the next 2 years. We grew up in this election for the National Congress and in the main states of the country. We have built an alliance with the indigenous movement and homeless workers movement that is the best new factor on the Brazilian left. We believe it's possible to push the legitimacy of fascist rule to the limit. 70% of Brazilians are against any pension reform, and the Bolsonaro government will try to apply an ultraliberal reform that wants to end welfare and put a system of savings similar to Pinochet in Chile that filled the pockets of bankers and today stavers the retires. The moment is terrible. Tended by the fascist paramilitary groups on in 1 month. Our resistance must be intelligent. We do not want any more martyrs. For this, your solidarity is fundamental. We need that our condemnations of Bolsonaro be spread as widely as possible. We need your shelter in the most difficult times. We need international networks of assistance to movements in Brazil. Why? Will not give up. Our hope is not over. Against the shadow of fascism has the flame of millions of Brazilians who went to the streets on October 20 to show that in Brazil there is popular resistance. This is our strength. For the memory of Marielle, Moa do Cantandê, and dozens of social fighters who were murdered for defending our people in recent months, we have no right to retreat. By the blood of our indigenous ancestors, Negros, Caboclos, we will not retreat. Comrades, more than ever, internationalism is a necessity. We need your solidarity.